Hello, Chad. How are you?
Good. How about you?
I am good. Let's start with your journey to carnivore. Like, when did you start looking into the lifestyle and what brought you there?
So I would say about a year and a half ago, perhaps longer actually, I stumbled across Paul Saladino, a video of him getting yelled at by a bunch of ladies on the show that I believe is called Doctors. And they were just yelling at him about the dangers of red meat. And it was the first time I ever heard anybody say anything along the lines of an ancestral appropriate diet, meaning that our ancestors built and forged our genetic code based on the environment we were in, which was a hunter-gatherer, red meat-based diet. And prior to that, every single thing I had looked up on my own was basically to avoid red meat and to be a plant-based diet to make myself better. And I was in such a horrible spot when that was going on. I was very excited to hear something new and to hear a psychologist, um, making the suggestion that there was another diet that I hadn't heard of, which was ancestrally appropriate, the proper human diet in order to heal. It was, on a psychological level, was something profound for me. And so I would say that maybe that was like 2 years ago at this point. But regardless, that's when I started diving into what is a proper human diet rather than just what is a healthy diet. And that's how I ended up finding Paul Saladino, which led to an interview with him and Anthony Chafee. I started learning about fasting. I found Dr. Sean Baker. I found Professor Bart Kay, Dr. Ken Berry. And I just kind of dove as far into it as I possibly could. And I started doing a lot of research about our ancestors. I started doing a lot of research about physiology, biology, nutrition, diet, and I had my world turned upside down. So to answer your question, I would probably say about a year and a half ago is where I probably went like full carnivore, but I heard animal based from Paul Saladino a little bit earlier.
Interesting. So their negativity brought you to research, which then made you go, no, they're wrong. I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
So tell
Yeah.
me, like, what does your carnivore plate look like? Because I've interviewed several different doctors and everybody kind of does it a little different. So, like, what does your plate look like at dinner?
So this is going to be a little bit different for me because I think a lot of people are in different places with how much they've damaged their body.
True.
And so I believe that a lot of people get away with like cold butter. Like I can't get away with cold butter. I think I'm too far off the rails and need to go into like crucial like icy critical care type of healing. So I only eat ruminant meat, salt, and water. And so what I mean by that is like I'll eat most of the cow. I'll eat most of a buffalo or a bison or a lamb, elk. And when I say most of, I love eating the bone marrow. I love eating, ground beef. And usually I try to make it so it's grass fed completely because I do believe the omega-6 to omega-3 ratios are important. And I say that because I think a lot of the inflammation that is occurring in the nutritional world right now is the fact that we are on a horrible ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s. And grass-fed beef and grass-fed bison or buffalo or lamb are the only ways that you can get a ratio that's even close to appropriate. And then that being said, I think it's very interesting that our biology calls for a certain amount of omega-3 fatty acids. And it turns out that brain, so I actually will include brain into my diet. Not usually beef brain, but like buffalo brain, bison brain, sometimes pork brain, but goat brain, things like that. And I incorporate that because that's actually a 4-to-1 ratio where there's 4 times the amount of omega-3s to omega-6s. And I've noticed that's helped with my anxiety a ton. So my plate usually looks like at least once a day, like a ribeye steak or a New York strip, maybe a pound or two of ground beef and then salt and water, and then I'll add bone marrow or beef suet or brains to that. And some days I go on a lot of fasting and feasting. So like some days nothing's on my plate. So I might go a few days without eating, oftentimes 2 days minimum, but sometimes that goes 4 to 5 days, and then I will eat after 5 days.
Do you find that difficult to do, or do you find that you're so satiated that you can go those days and not even think about it?
You know what's very interesting is when I was first heard about fasting, I was more animal based, like Paul Saladino, and those 3 days were actually pretty rough, not as hard as I thought they would be. But since I've gone carnivore and I've become fat adapted, so it took me probably 6 months to get to this point. Um, I eat until I'm satiated every single day. And then once I kind of do that to the point where I'm just like, that last meal wasn't that great, I kind of get disgusted with the food. I know, not disgusted, but more like, ooh, that was a little much. And then I just were like, you know what? I'm not going to eat until I'm hungry again. And then some days that's 2 days out, and some days that's 5 days out. And so it's not hard at all because I'm just not hungry. And I am a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I own my Jiu-Jitsu academy. I'm very active. And so it's crazy to me, like I'm in day 4 doing Jiu-Jitsu, working out, and I just have all of this energy and I'm not thinking about food at all. And it's actually extremely liberating feeling. So to say, is it hard? I think it was hard building the foundation to get here, but now that I'm here, it's very easy. I can easily, like right now, if you ask me to stop eating for a few days, it wouldn't be a problem at all.
You're adapted. Well, and we'll get to this, but just to comment on it, I think that is how our original ancestors ate. I think they hunted,
Exactly.
they ate a huge feast, and then it might have been 4 or 5 days, or at least for a full meal. Okay, so now, so do you eat multiple times per day, or do you just kind of go with the flow and sometimes it's twice, sometimes it's one?
You know what I will do is I learned this from Professor Bart K, is to make sure that I actually knock myself out of ketosis when I eat, which means you need to eat enough protein within a small amount of time in order to get the gluconeogenesis to a level where it knocks you out of ketosis for a little bit, which is important for proper kidney function and therefore proper electrolyte secretion and containment. And so that has been very interesting. So I either eat one meal a day where I just eat until I'm like, oh my God, I'm stuffed. Or if I'm working out really heavy, I'll do 2 meals, but they'll be very close to one another to make sure I get the amount of protein. And then if I ever feel hungrier later, I don't suppress myself from eating whatsoever. What I'll do is I'll eat a lot of like very like beef suet or bone marrow. So I'll eat like a bunch of fat until I feel satiated again. And that usually does the trick for me.
Well, and I noticed you've never mentioned eggs, so no eggs.
No eggs. I actually just did a video on eggs, looking into the defense chemicals in eggs, as well as protease and proteinase inhibitors that actually block the proper digestion rather, of protein. Some people say that's broken down when cooking it, but then I I hear a lot of conflicting data, but I don't do very well with eggs. My kids eat eggs. My wife eats eggs, but I don't seem to do well. And I think that's because I'm as broken as I am. But I also believe that there are enough defense chemicals and compounds within eggs and anti-nutrients that if you are trying to reach ultimate healing, I think that could be avoided with positive measures.
Okay. And you mentioned wife and kids. Do they also eat the way you do?
They do. They're all in the carnivore lifestyle. My daughter just last night got all excited because she made steak and butter gals uh, pancakes, carnivore pancakes. So
And how old are the kids, if I can ask?
they are 7, 9, 10, and 14.
And they've been on the carnivore lifestyle for how long?
They've been more animal based for the last probably 6 months, but lately they've gone a lot more carnivore. And my wife has actually pretty committed to going full carnivore. And then my youngest son, which is very interesting, he's 7, but he hasn't grown in the past 2.5, maybe even 3 years. Based on our last doctor's appointments, he hasn't grown. And I decided to make some deliberate changes with him. So he's on my diet. He went lion diet, and he only eats grass-fed and grass-finished beef. I just made a video with him, and I took away his iPad. I make him walk every morning in the sun with no shirt on and barefoot into ground, and I make him do a certain amount of exercises. And anyway, that being said, in the past month, and so I've only been doing this with him for a month and a half, but I measured him in the past month, he grew, well, not even past 3 weeks, he grew a half inch. So I'm going to see if I can keep him on this diet a little bit longer, because in the past 2.5 years, he literally hasn't grown more than a quarter of an inch. So for him to grow a half inch in the last few weeks by putting him on this diet and regimen, I think is helping. So we'll see how long I keep him on a more strict diet. And then as he grows, maybe I'll make it a little bit more lenient.
That's amazing. That's quick for him to add a half inch like that. That's great.
Yeah.
Where are you sourcing product from? Are you doing like local farmers, or are you doing mail order? Like, where are you getting the meat?
So I have been going back and forth and experimenting. There are right now a lot of good butchers and meat processing shops where I'm at, but I'm actually very much in the business right now of looking for an aged cow so I can buy the entire cow for me and my family and process it so that way I can get the brains and the bone marrow and everything that I want out of it, in the manner in which I want, because I think a lot of the beef suet and organs and stuff are kind of omitted. So I'm looking right now, I've been talking to a lot of people of either getting my own lamb or getting my own cow and seeing how I enjoy that. But a lot of the time it's local butchers. Every once in a while, I'll find like a good deal at like natural grocers with like 100% grass-fed beef, and so then I'll get like, for a pretty good deal, I'll go and get a bunch of ground beef for me and the family. And then eggs, I have to, if I do eggs for my family, it has to be from like one of my friends or a source that I trust, because I just do not trust any sort of mass provider of what they feed their eggs and how they really pasteurize them. So when it comes to sourcing food, and then I am in the middle of moving to Oklahoma and looking for property. So eventually I want to raise all my own food and be completely self-reliant and kind of like off, I wouldn't say off grid because I'll probably still be on the internet and stuff, but in terms of being completely independent from the grid.
Right on. Now you mentioned healing. So when you were doing this research, what was it that was, if it's okay to ask, that was going
Mhm.
on in your body, your mind, that you needed to heal, or you felt you needed to heal?
That I just wrote this in a very long letter. It was very emotional actually when I'm applying for VA benefits because I was just listing all the suffering I was going through. But the number one thing that was debilitating to me was my panic disorder, my brain fog, my anxiety, my PTSD, my depression, and started to get to like suicidal thoughts, um, and ideations. The the mental aspect was by far the worst, even though I was dealing with some horrible physical issues. And I went through weight gain, like, and not like a lot of weight gain, but like weight gain for me. But what was even worse was the weight loss. So for example, just to give you an idea, I used to cut down in weight during my high school wrestling season, my junior and senior year, down to 140 pounds. I used to have to cut weight to get to there. And I was weighing like 132. I remember the one time that I weighed in. So I had lost a lot of weight like I was a cancer patient. Uh, but my digestive issues were so bad that I wasn't retaining any food. I even started developing these weird phobias mentally, which kind of branched off and started to encompass my way of eating. I would get acute like flu symptoms like 3, 4, and sometimes 5 times a week, where I would just like eat something and then I would be like I would have the flu. It's like someone injected me with the intense acute flu. And I would be sitting there like shaking, temperature control was hard, migraine that was debilitating. It felt like somebody was pulling barbed wire through my digestive system. I would go constipated to diarrhea and back and forth. And then I would like, depending on how bad the case was, I would have like projectile vomit. And a few times I actually had to go to the hospital just so that way they could give me an IV to replace fluids and to get me to stop throwing up because medication wouldn't work. And I
Wow.
just couldn't stop dry heaving. But yeah, this was happening multiple times a week. And my phobias and my brain fog, though, regardless of all the other digestive system like issues I was having, like if I could have traded my leg for a moment of mental clarity, I probably would have. That's how bad my mental state was. And I wouldn't say I'm like 100% right now. I'm probably like 97, 98% because every once in a while I kind of have like a trigger back. But for the most part, I think I have found, especially since I've started incorporating more brain into my diet, I adding brain to my diet probably brought me from like 65, 70% to like this 95, 97%.
Well, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. Was this all post-military, or did you have like teenage issues and anxieties like in high school even?
No, actually, I was like a very talented, healthy, and somewhat arrogant jerk in high school. And I would say like jerk as in I never like expressed these things out or like mean to people. Maybe some people thought I was mean to them, but you know, I mean, I wasn't very sensitive to mental disorders whatsoever. You know, I was like, people get sad, go out and work out, and you know, people get anxious, and you know, what I mean, I was kind of like, this is the way the world is. And so when I joined the military, I had an event, an unorthodox event happen to me where I almost died, and I was like, actually, in my head, I was like certain, I'm like, oh, I am dying. This is how it goes. I can't believe this is happening. You know, like you just don't think it's going to happen to you. And that event launched me down this spiral of agony and almost like mental torture. And it came out of nowhere. And which the thing is like I had always been able to handle stress and then I couldn't handle like any sort of stress anymore. Uh and what I mean by that is like I remember when I was at my worst, I I couldn't work out. Like I would get overheated and my phobias would start rising in and my anxiety and panic would kick in. And I felt like I couldn't cool down and my throat was closing up. And so like I couldn't even work out to escape. Like so like the biggest thing is like the best thing you could do for anxiety and depression is like work out, but I couldn't even physically work out. It exacerbated my issues. So
Do you think that that was like a cortisol issue? Like, in other words, I know that our brain can't differentiate between working out and running away from a lion. So do you think it was kind of reading the stress of working out as some sort of an attack?
I think I was so inflamed.
Mm,
I would think I was so inflamed that any sort of workout um exacerbated whatever issues like you're sick, you're so sick, dude, there's no time to be working out right now. You know
ah,
what I mean? Like
yeah,
and I believe, yeah, cortisol, you're exactly right. The body can't tell the difference between anywhere from a social threat to a physical threat. So like test anxiety is equivalent in brain chemistry as a lion being about to attack you. So yeah, that could be part of it. And but I honestly think that I just the way I felt just felt like I was had an extreme temperature. You know what I mean? Where it was
yeah.
like, oh my God, I'm about to pass out right now.
Unbelievable. That is awful. So growing up, let's go through the stages of life. Growing up, were you like, did your family eat a relatively healthy, quote unquote, diet, or was it, Cheez-Its and soda?
uh, so I would say a combination. I was very athletic. My mom actually, she one like she and I, we have our ups and downs, but I love my mom a lot. And the greatest thing that she did for me was have me in a lot of sports.
Mm.
But as a tragedy of that, I ate out a lot, like a
Uh,
lot of getting me from school to the next thing. So Taco Bell, or yeah, certain things like that. So at least not like I never was big into junk food, so never like candy, and we weren't allowed to have like soda at home. But at home, it's not like we ate healthy per se. It was like cereal and yeah, so a lot of eating out, cereal, pasta, chicken. Um,
Standard American diet where they tell
yeah,
you it's healthy, but it's really not. Yeah,
exactly. But not like never like sugary things, you know what I mean? And if we ever actually had sugary things, like for example, like syrup, there couldn't be like any sugar added to it or things like that. I remember my dad was on a kick about like no sugar even in ketchup, and so we are kind of like a pretty plain family, but I think we just ate out a ton. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah.
Due to the nature. But regardless, though, I was like in shape and I was athletic and I was happy. I was a very happy kid, and I grew up in a cabin in the woods, out in the middle of nowhere, with no TV, no internet, um, and it was kind of like a godsend to be out in the forest and playing out there and not being kind of like brainwashed by TV and other stuff like that.
That's wonderful. That's yeah, that's rare and fabulous. Yeah, it sounds like your parents were doing the very best they could with the information that was being given to us at the time. And, judging by your age, that was a time where everything was low fat, no fat,
Yeah.
which we all know. We'll get back to that. So when did you enter the military? How old were you?
The first contract I ever signed was in 2010, and I got out in, I want to say, 2021. It was kind of like in the
Quite a
midst of
length.
COVID.
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
okay. That's quite a long time.
It
It's
was
not,
11 years. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's not like 2 years and then you were out. That's a career.
A little bit. Yeah. I ended up having some back and forth. Like I wouldn't get the shot during the COVID. And then so they were like kicking me out. And then I was in the midst of like trying to switch branches and I was getting some weird feedback. And so I was in the reserves at the time and they were just like, we're going to discharge you. And I was like, all right. And I was planning on doing like 20 years or more, but just didn't work out that way.
So they were really pushing those shots. I remember hearing on the news there were a lot of people leaving the military because of that.
They lost a lot of good people, I think, too. I think it was a huge detriment to the military.
From what you were seeing, would you say that 50% of the people refused, or was it more?
It was a lot easier for us reservists and people in the National Guard because it was like we already had maybe a career on the side and we were doing this for like the love of serving in our country or I mean, a little bit of added benefits,
Right.
but like we had our reasons, what I mean, to be in the reserves and stay somewhat in the military, going from active duty to a reserve type thing. So I think a lot more of them were willing to be like, I'm not getting the shot. But I think a lot of active duty, um, it was like this has been my life plan since the beginning. So I think the pressure to for them to get the shot was a lot higher.
Have you heard any feedback, like those who were forced to get it? Are there issues or more people experiencing illnesses or anything that you know of?
I've a lot of it's like skeptic, what's it called?
Conspiracy theory?
Specu speculation.
Oh, spec.
Like I felt like crap, this, that, and the other thing since I got the shot. And I was like, you feel like crap a lot though. You know what I mean? Like I'm sure the shot didn't help, but also what I mean, I've seen you get sick with these other things before. And I ended up getting the shot, which was the most frustrating part about it, is to get the shot and still get discharged from the military. But I ended up getting the shot because I was a government contractor. And so when the military was demanding it, I was like, no, I mean, I have a good career. But then they said all government and government contractors have to get the shot in order to work for the government or the DoD. And that's a job I couldn't give up at the time. So reluctantly, I ended up getting the shot a little bit later. So that was kind of, you know what I mean? If I would have known that, I would have gotten the shot and I'll probably still be in the military. But anywho, I noticed adverse side effects right off the bat, but that was also when I was in the worst of like my mentally and physically going through a lot of torturous kind of internal strife at that time. And so I went through, I noticed side effects. And that's probably because I was already so sick already. So
So yeah, it attacks weaknesses. That's what I'm told. If you already have an issue, it acerbates.
yeah.
Okay. So talk to me about like nutrition in the military and your thoughts there.
So I did a video on this as well. That's why I'm so aggravated, and that's actually what promoted me to start a YouTube channel and being a lot more vocal about this. Is that okay? Let me lay a foundation here. In the military, an MRE is basically junk food, whether you like it or not. You can go to army.mil and look up their opinions on an MRE, and nobody is trying to fool anybody. There's no, it's all processed and ultra processed food in the MREs, right?
Right.
And that's just the name of the game. If you need to get something for cheap that's going to last a long time with a high shelf life, and feed the masses who are fighting a war for you, it's probably the best option that you're going to get. But like, how do I say, like the attorney general basically for the army, the guy who's like, this is okay or that's not okay, allows you to be on those MREs for 21 days at a time. And so like if you were to go on MREs for 21 days and then all of a sudden eat a hot meal, and then you could go back on MREs for 21 more days and additional days. So not only that, I think a lot of the DFAC food, the dining facility food or the galley food that we get, oftentimes offers not the healthiest things either. I think it's kind of like prison food. It's like the lower end spectrum of food that's mass produced. I think there's a lot of chemicals and garbage within that food as well. So unless you're very, very conscientious, especially on deployments or in trainings and things like that, like the likelihood that they're going to let you go up there and be like, hey, I need like a ribeye steak or some ground beef or something with nothing else in it. They're they're not going to be able to accommodate very well. I'm sure that you could do something, but the likelihood of staying on a good carnivore or a species appropriate diet while you're deployed or in a training, like I said, is going to be very low. And so that's where I start getting into these issues, because they've done a study that showed that people, even just 1 week on a junk food diet or an ultra processed diet, which by the way is very similar to these MREs, lowers or rather increases depression and mental illness significantly in just 1 week by switching to this diet. And on top of that, prolonged periods of stress, extreme stress, it also affects these same areas of the brain. And that part of the brain specifically that I'm going to relate to is the hippocampus. And so there's these direct relationships between the volume size of the hippocampus and people's mental stability. So the smaller in volume, the more it decreases in size, is a correlation between somebody's mental resiliency. And
Mm.
what's very interesting is the way that you grow the hippocampus back is not only with something like stem cells, but with something called BDNF and human growth hormone. But BDNF is brain derived neurotrophic factor. And guess what blocks that from being released is insulin. And so what's very interesting is prolonged periods of stress have been also shown to decrease the size of the hippocampus. Alcohol has been shown to decrease it. Tobacco has been shown to decrease it. Caffeine has also been shown to have negative effects on the hippocampus. And so this is why I'm saying you send these soldiers, these vulnerable soldiers, off to a place where they're dealing with nonstop stress all the time. right? Which is you can't avoid that. That's the nature of the beast. But then you give them junk food, you know what I mean, for
Yeah.
weeks at a time. And then the hot meals that they can't eat are doing much better. And so basically you're just destroying the system that they currently exist in. And then on top of that, they can't release BDNF to help repair that size of that hippocampus. And then in addition to all that, the culture of the military is like tobacco, energy drinks, alcohol, and they eat up, just a bunch of junk food all the time. And it's like touted. It's like, I'm running on licorice and Red Bulls right now. You know what I mean? And people have their addiction to coffee and it. So anyway, I'm just saying that you can find vending machines and all this other crap, at least when I was in, for these energy drinks, these coffees, and this quick access to all this garbage. And then we're wondering why we're developing this PTSD at such atrocious rates. And we think the best thing for them is to put them on an SSRI when they're not doing well, rather than addressing the culture and the lifestyle of our soldiers and not educating them better on what a proper human diet is. This is very costly, not only to the military, but to the VA, to the taxpayers, and it's the most debilitating on the soldier themselves. I'm sure they would do anything in their power, give up their right leg, and some people have, obviously, but give up like a body part in order to get back to mental clarity, because I know I would have. And all it is a simple education on proper diet and nutrition, and that if you were to get back to that lifestyle, not only do I think that you would decrease the size of the amygdala, because what ends up happening is your amygdala, and I'll explain this real quick. What happens is your amygdala, when it sends a signal to your hypothalamus to release fight or flight, right? And so your parasympathetic nervous system is working appropriate. It's telling you when to be nervous, when to be anxious, when to fight, when to flight, when to freeze, and then it sends a signal to your hippocampus to remind you this is the memory that put you into a state of fight or flight and survival. So remember this. And what ends up happening is your amygdala becomes swollen. And there's this event called amygdala hijacking, where random events start getting sent to the hypothalamus. And so you just kind of go into fight or flight out of nowhere and have these panic attacks, and your hippocampus starts decreasing in size as your amygdala starts to kind of engulge inside, or sorry, become engulfed with these chemicals and become swollen. And so our goal is to slowly start to teach our amygdala, right, that we're okay, and stop being triggered by these random hijackings, start to increase the size of the hippocampus so that way it can properly start sending these signals to the prefrontal cortex to say like, hey, we are okay. We're no longer in a place of danger. Now is a time of healing. And as long as that hippocampus and the amygdala are kind of situated in those different uh, positions, I guess, then we will constantly be putting scent into these fears and these frequencies of fear of fight or flight. So that being said, in order to get out of that, we need the proper education for our soldiers and for men and for anybody who's dealing with PTSD. We need to condition them to say, this is not a life sentence. All of us who have dealt with this PTSD feel like we're just broken. Hey, we did something, we're broken, and now this is the rest of our life. And we need to know that that's not the case. Our ancestors dealt with atrocities and traumas every single day. Like, even just to go on a hunt and to kill an animal would be a trauma for most freaking Gen Z and millennials. Like, a normal day for our ancestors would be a trauma forever. But that's not the case. They survived and got stronger from the traumas. And that's the whole point of our brain, is to adapt and overcome. And whatever doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And we kind of been gaslighted to believe like, well, you're broken. And so now you need our medication forever, or you have this illness or this genetic thing. And it's just your genetics, and you just have to be dependent on our medicine forever. And now when you start looking at, and we can get into the conspiracies of the pharmaceutical companies, but how much money they have invested, and the reason why SSRIs are like the only drug you can prescribe to somebody who has PTSD in the military is atrocious because their numbers are atrocious of how they heal vets. And 22 vets a day commit suicide. And that's just an unacceptable number. And you've had 23 years to fix this. And that's the best you got. The numbers are getting worse over time, even though we're all investing more over time, more in research and more in money and more in studies. And we're making it worse almost on them. So that's a long-winded thing to say, okay, so how do we get out of this? How do we fix this? And to me, I call it steak, strangles, and stoicism. So this is my shirt. It's a Make Veterans Great Again. And so my idea is to give people the proper human diet so that way the system, the mechanism that controls their thoughts, their physiological processes, and their chemical balances and their hormones, give them the proper nutrition. Make it so their BDNF can be released so that way it can grow back the hippocampus. Allow the inflammation to go down so that way the amygdala isn't being hijacked anymore. Allow these processes and these thoughts and these files get transferred to the prefrontal cortex so you can actually deal with it and realize you're in a place that is safe. You know, when you're in a place that is lack of nutrition and inflamed nutrition deficit, then your brain is never going to heal. It doesn't want to. It says, no, you still need to be fighting. This is not a time for healing. And so get yourself on a proper human diet, re-simulate that combat. So go back into a place of simulated combat in a safe environment. So something like Strangles, which is for me, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, but I think any combat sport is going to help. And a lot of people do sprinting. Sprinting is another way to do this, which has been shown to release BDNF. It's been released, been shown to release human growth hormone. And I think it's a great way to put yourself back into the environment that is simulating survival and then get out on the other side of it with a group of people who love you, where there's a sense of proper hierarchy. And that hierarchy is based on merit and execution. So, like in jujitsu, everybody has a belt system, everybody earns exactly where they are through the merit of their actions, through the execution of their actions. And I think that military people really vibe and resonate with that. And then stoicism, which is just a practical life philosophy to put you at the heart of your autonomy and at the heart of responsibility for your actions, to realize that regardless of this external stimuli that happens to you, that you are responsible for how you respond to that. And that kind of starts regulating your responses and say, no, regardless of outside events, I'm ultimately the dictator of proper response and proper reaction. And so if I'm ever upset, that's my fault. That's not the event's fault. And so that, I know that was long-winded, but I believe that the mind, the body, and the soul are all strongly intertwined, and you can't raise one without raising all three of them. So if one is dragging you down, all the rest of them will drag you down as well. So anyway, sorry, I'll go ahead and stop talking so that way you
No,
can
no, no, it's great. It's all incredible information. First of all, as civilians, we can all relate to a lot of what you're saying because everyone I talk to has PTSD and experiences in life, and that we're all struggling. But you mentioned you use the word strangles, I think.
yeah,
Can you tell
for
me what that
jujitsu.
is?
Jujitsu. So
Oh,
strangles, steak, strangles, and stoicism. I like the alliteration. However, strangles is just for jujitsu because there's a lot of choking in jujitsu, but it's submission grappling. Now I wanted to do steak submissions in stoicism, but it just didn't flow or turn as many heads as steak, strangles, and stoicism. Because like not only if you ask somebody how do you heal and you say steaks, I mean that just kind of throws you. It's more eye-catching, you know what I mean? So I wanted to do something that was going to catch a little bit more eyes. So steak, strangles, and stoicism is kind of what I went with.
right on. Okay, so now knowing that or at least it seems they're pushing this plant-based diet, I'm curious, does the military accommodate other types of diets, like let's say a Muslim soldier or a vegan soldier?
Yeah, so that was actually very frustrating. Is if you say, "Hey, I'm vegan, I'm vegetarian, I'm this, I am that," like they are right off the bat, "Hey, we got to help this person make sure they stay on their vegetarian diet," which by the way has like no premise. Not like I guess for a moral sense, I would get that, but it has no premise in health. You know what I mean? But regardless, let's go ahead and just omit that for now and say, hey, I'm only allowed to eat red meat. They would look at you and be like, no, we're not. You would look like a joke. However, that would be if I were to go back in the military, the only way I would join. And
Right,
so uh yeah, to answer your question, no, they are not accommodating in like from my knowledge, and I could be wrong about this at this point because it's been a few years, but they're not accommodating whatsoever to that style, and they think you're joking and that you just want a bunch of ribeyes. And no. And I think that they're more accommodating to vegetarian probably because it saves them a shit ton of money. So that
true.
would be my opinion. So yeah, that's a little bit frustrating because one of my biggest frustrations is right now, if you decide to make an intentional claim to your health, yeah, you know what? I am going to be the person who's in charge of my health. I'm going to now do my own research. Everyone says to do your own research. And you Google what is a healthy diet, the first 100 pages will be plant-based
Mhm,
BS.
mhm,
The AI overview gives you something of a consensus, an authoritative sort of consensus, and it tells you that it's like fruits and vegetables, carbohydrates, and protein is important, but better come from like very lean sources and tofu. And like red meat is always vilified. And so what sucks is the truth is buried under mountains of garbage, and most people give up because they're getting sicker and sicker and sicker trying to dig through the garbage. And unless you get as sick as somebody like me, or you just happen to have good critical thinking skills and you hear somebody finally say, because I never heard about the carnivore diet, right? Sean Baker has been out for years talking about this, but I've only heard about him in the last year and a half. So like I for me who did so much research on this diet, on diet and lifestyle to help fix what was going on with me, I didn't, with all that research, I didn't hear anything. Nobody around me was on carnivore. Nobody was no word of mouth did I hear that somebody was only eating meat and curing themselves. So to me, that's a travesty. It's a travesty that not only is it not just easily available, but it's under mountains of misinformation.
mhm. Well, we know that there are studies that have been suppressed, that prove exactly what you're saying. Why do you think they're pushing this plant-based diet on everyone? Everywhere you turn, you see an article about it.
So let's start at the macro scale. Macro scale is money, easy. Protein is very are difficult. It's very expensive to put on the shelves. And so that's why you will see most of these things are like seed oils and sugars and uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Carbs,
Carbs, yeah.
right? And so that's easy to put on the shelves. It does well, very dehydrated, right? And so as you put it up on the shelves, it not only is cheap, but people come back because they're not satiated. And we all know kind of like the chemical processes that continue to make us hungry, but it also makes you dehydrated and thirst. A lot of our ancestors are people don't realize this, but used to get our hydration from eating, right? And so we didn't carry around water with us all the time.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
get,
We didn't
and
even do
so
that in the 80s and 90s. Like that's a new thing.
it's a very new thing. And so people don't often realize like when they feel hungry, sometimes they can just have some water, like electrolyte water, and then they feel full again because that pull to thirst or hunger rather is a lot of the time dehydration. And so anyway, just to kind of put on that level is one, it's very cheap to do that. Very cheap. Two, let's go a little bit in a more pragmatic sense. Actually, you know what? I won't even call it pragmatic. Let's go straight to conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Um, bread and circus, right? So a lot of people have known this for many years. Bread and circus give the people food and give them entertainment, and you can do whatever you want. And so all the way back to the Greeks and the Romans, um, they would give. So while they thought there was going to be an uprising in Rome, they would give them free bread and they would start the games in the Colosseum and chariot races and stuff like that. A lot of people don't realize this as well, that they would also cut off meat supply to the city because it chemically castrates you. It takes away your ability to make testosterone. And though they didn't know the terms and the science behind this back in the Roman times, they knew by observing like action and reaction, right? What keeps somebody manly, what keeps somebody unruly compared to being dormant. Because our ancestors, I believe the three hardest things for our ancestors to achieve was food, information, and sex. Those were the three hardest things that you could earn. And in the first 5 minutes that you wake up, you can get food, you can get all the information that you want, you can watch porn with a flashing screen right in front of your face within the first 5 minutes of your day, thousands of calories. And if you look at it, it used to take days, it used to take lives, it used to take traumas just to get food. And all those chemicals, all those motivational chemicals that kept you going were just pushing to get that dopamine release, right? And then learning new things oftentimes took somebody dying. Like, what's going on with the weather? Oh, we all took a wrong turn and now we're all dead. Or that person ate that plant and now that person's dead. You know what I mean? That person was messing around with an animal we've never seen before. That person's dead. So information, learning new things took a long time and oftentimes came with a trauma, which is why trauma is important. And then to earn your place in the tribe, to earn reproductive rights, is a lot more nuanced than we realized. People weren't just letting you like, oh, I'm 14 now, I can start sleeping around. That's not how it worked. It's like you had to become like someone who earned a place in order to be married to like somebody within the tribe in order to reproduce. And so all these things though are resulted and rewarded with dopamine. And that dopamine is so addictive because it used to be so hard to earn. And so what's very interesting is with these phones in our faces, and by the way, if you can't afford a phone, you can get a government issued phone.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that they can shove this in your face because not only is it force feeding you information and keeping you distracted, but at the same time, you can get all those things. You can get a bunch of prepackaged food that doesn't make you satiated. It puts you on the medical system. It makes you reliant. It's very cheap and very profitable. And then it makes you easily manageable, right? That the same thing with bread and circus because you are getting your dopamine. And when you have all your dopamine, all your motivational chemicals remain dormant. And what's very interesting about this is uh it's like that seems like it's a little bit much to be deliberate. But when we look back at Freud and his nephew and all these people who are involved in mass propaganda, they've known all these things. You're right, not necessarily Freud, but from the beginning, we started studying human psychology in order for optimization of manipulation. And so you can't tell me that we have teams of scientists that are engineering our food to be addictive, and we know this. We have teams of scientists in order to make social media addictive, and we know this. You cannot tell me that we don't have teams of scientists who understand these motivational chemicals and these dopamine chemicals, which are out there. I can Google them. So you can't tell me these teams of scientists are not working in order to better manage the human race, but also the American population, and in order to keep certain people in power and to keep certain what's it called, reigns in power, like like Bill Gates, for example. It's
Okay.
very interesting that he got involved in food and in vaccines. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
He's a tech guy, but here's the thing: is he's not keeping his power through tech. He's keeping his power through like biology now. Like, why did all of a sudden we like validate him to be the person to help us with vaccines and food? You know
I
what?
ask
So I
myself this all the time. How this man couldn't even keep viruses out of his computers. Why is he now in that, you know?
so this is my conspiracy theory, and so my conspiracy theory is to say that one, I think this is all a system that are in bed with one another to keep the powers that be because the world is so messed up right now. And we kind of are all aware of it, but nobody's doing anything about it. And the only people who I see are doing things about it are like the people who have taken extremes into their diet. Like vegans are pretty extreme, and they oftentimes go up and do things about it. But you know what's very interesting are the carnivores are the ones who are like, no, I'm like going off grid. And I am buying myself an arsenal of weapons, and I am, going self-reliant and screw the government. I'm going to start grounding. I'm looking into my circadian rhythm. Like there's a whole new enlightening and motivation aspect of these people who take intentional thoughts and decisions with their diet and lifestyle. And I'm seeing that as a recurring thing because they have the motivation to do it. And the rest of the population, they see all the same things we see. They see that diabetes is everywhere. They see that the ultra processed food is everywhere. They see that kids are getting fat. They see that their own kids are getting fat. They see that the climate change, right? Regardless of where you believe in climate change, there's obvious horrible things going on in the climate. Monocropping, you know what I mean? Billions of bees dying all the time, like up to what they say, like 70 million to 90 million birds are dying from pesticides. Uh, like all the mass death, all the monocropping, and what I mean by monocropping is like all these other plants, plant species that are dying in order so a bunch of palm trees can live in their area, ruining the diversity of our planet. We also don't realize that the Amazon was made man-made, and also the Sahara Desert was man-made. Getting involved with our climate can cause catastrophic results. And so, um, everybody is seeing this happen. Everybody is aware of how messed up the world is and how corrupt everything is, but they don't do shit about it because they're in debt. They got to go to work and they don't have motivation, strength, effort, energy, or inspiration to do anything else with their lives because they're strung out on dopamine from the second they wake up, and they're kept dormant there. And not only chemically, but mentally and spiritually, they are kept dormant there. And if you ask somebody who's barely making it day by day to rise up and to go have a revolution or to go stand up for these causes, which are very obvious, very abrupt, they don't have time for it. That's somebody else's battle, you know,
Yeah,
that's, and they have kids to feed and stuff like that. However, carnivores and other people who take deliberate intention into their diet, they do have the motivation. And that's why I'm noticing they they do make the actions. They do execute on those things in order to make their kids better, to make their lives better, to make the people around them better, and to get away from the people who are dictating other people's lives in a negative way.
right. So like during the pandemic, there were doctors who did speak out and were trying to change, what was going on, what was being recommended to us. And many of them were threatened. They had their licenses taken away, and I believe there were a few that were put in jail temporarily. I think Dr.
Mm.
is her name Gold? She was put in, she was in jail for a little while and finally got out. So how do we do this? What do we do? Because, many doctors, first of all, I don't think it's sinister what doctors are doing, like what they're telling us. I think they believe what they're told. And so they think they're telling us the right things. Um, However, some doctors do think outside the box and they're trying to get this message out. How do we do that when we're up against a system that wants us on that plant-based diet, wants us, strung out on dopamine?
So this is why I started speaking out about it, is because though we'll start out grassroots,
Yeah,
our voices will start catching the attraction, right? What we need to do is we need to start educating people like this is how the planet is saved, right? This is how your health is saved, things like that. But we are blessed with people like, Elon Musk, for example, who, these philanthropists, but they're finally coming out of the woodwork to be like, I'm just buying Twitter and exposing, how the FBI was, you know, had this little, what's it called? Collaboration, with they're in cahoots with Twitter to suppress these things, these narratives from going out, to keep, platforms. And so I guess the answer to your question is to privatize your own section of this media, to decentralize information, to decentralize food, to decentralize funding. So that way it's what is decided that is being disseminated is no longer mainstreamed in any way, shape, or form. And that's what we're seeing, like if you go to Turning Point USA, you know what I mean? And you go to Daily Wire and you go to these different things, it's like, yeah, you're gonna have to pay a subscription, but at least you're hearing information from a new source. Thank goodness we have things like YouTube and whatnot like that. They kind of, suppress certain information there. But the more of us who get out and start speaking, the more word of mouth would get out, in my opinion. And the
Mhm.
more we just start filling people with questions and just pointing out the facts. And then all of a sudden, now you have RFK, Robert Kennedy is out there, Bob Jr. is that's his like main platform is to make America healthy again. And Elon Musk is committed to freedom of speech on, the online world. So now we have like these billionaires and these royalty like Kennedy and them who have achieved enough power through the grassroots movement, to hold that power and to make influence to get our voices heard. So it
Mhm.
was honestly a democratic process. However, the next thing to answer your question is if we can't depend on them, what we can do though is vote with our dollar. And our vote with our dollar means that there are more and more and more people who are no longer participating in your BS. They are no longer participating. Like they're going off and getting communes. They're going off and starting their own ways of generating revenue. They're going off and they're getting off of your grid and not dependent on your roads anymore and doing all these other very interesting things to make themselves reliant and say, F you, government. You know what I mean?
Yep.
We'll go ahead and have all these people and keep them trapped in the city. That's fine. But there are a ton of us who are no longer playing this game. We're prioritizing our family. You know what I mean? We live in a weird society now where it's like you have the government raise your kids for 7 to 8 hours a day, and then they might do sports or whatever. You're working, 10 hours a day plus commute. And then you go home, you barely see one another. You ask how their grades are doing, how sports are going. You might see them a little bit on the weekends, but you're also trying to relax on the weekends and get things done. And then all of a sudden they're 18 and applying for college. That college may be close, it may be far away. And all of a sudden they're going to get a job. Where does that job take you? That's like, oh, there's a job in Illinois. How much does it pay? Okay, bye. Enjoy Illinois. And it's like, you're no longer connected with your family. What I'm seeing is like a new way of living where it's like, we're going to go off and we're going to learn a trade. We're going to learn how to raise cattle. We're going to learn how to do stuff and distribute things online. We're going to learn this. And it's like these clans are getting together and they're avoiding the government and they're creating new ways of building generational wealth where it's not about giving your kid to the corporation, the system, the government. Um, you know, it's not about becoming a lawyer or a doctor or whatever. It's about becoming back to our roots, where it's like, you're not outsourcing your health anymore. You're not outsourcing your diet. You're not outsourcing food processing. You're not outsourcing knowledge. Thank goodness for the internet. You can get all the information you ever needed in the world. You could YouTube how to build what's it called? A regenerative farm. You can YouTube all of these things. Why do I need a lawyer if I'm like not even participating in the government anymore? You know what I mean? But I'm sure that as water rights and stuff, you're going to need a lawyer. But like you stop outsourcing most of these things and you become somebody who's all around a more generalized character
Yeah,
rather
I
than a
love what
specialized
you're
character.
saying. Yeah, I love the idea of homeschooling. The idea they demonized farming for a long time because the only thing people really see is factory farming, which is awful. I mean, you see the little bloody piglets and the mother's trapped in a cage, and it's awful. So I understand why people think farming's horrible, but that's not real farming.
Mm-mm.
And they need to see what a real farm is like, what a real ranch is like. And I think bringing young people back to farming is important.
I think that and I don't know how much time we have, but I would really like to talk to you a little bit since you say that that our disconnect from food has probably made us the most immoral group of people on the planet. The
Yeah.
fact that we have no idea how food is operated and the most healthy food is operated. And if you think about our hunter-gatherers ancestors, you know how involved they were in every aspect of acquiring food? Not only did they have to study the animal, they had to study the terrain. They had to master and love the weather. They had to master and love the food that our food ate, you know, and the how this all relates and all these different cycles and studying the stars and studying uh seasonal patterns, daily patterns, monthly patterns. They had to study so many things, but the thing is, it wasn't study. It was intricate, intimate love and passion for for being involved in the process of acquiring and eating your food. The amount of respect that you build for nature, being out in the elements and doing that, the amount of respect you have for the plants that are growing, the amount of respect that you have for the rain and for the sun and for the clouds and for the wind. It's, I have never been more spiritual in my life ever than since having gone carnivore. And I thought I was a pretty spiritual person prior to that. And it makes sense because the more I get connected with my food, the more I get connected with myself. And they say that reading a book, a physical book with pages, is better for you than reading an ebook because you can feel it in your hands from beginning to end. You can feel the progression of the storyline, by the thickness of the pages. The same thing, what's very interesting is 20% of our digestive acids are released before food even enters the mouth. And that goes in with whether it's like cooking or I say touching your food. I think touching your food is very important. Smelling your food, the anticipation of it. So it's weird because a lot of our food is processed, which means we're not touching it. We're just throwing it in our body. And now we're missing out on 20% of the digestive process because it has to catch up because it's like, oh, we all of a sudden have 3,000 calories in our stomach. You know what I mean? Rather than going through that process. So
Right.
when you're fasting and feasting, you have to realize their bodies completely were in tune and understood when that hunt was happening. Like we're doing the pre-hunt, we're doing the reconnaissance, and then okay, now we're like on them, and now okay, like in a little bit we're going to go up and we're going to go get the kill, and then whether or not you got the kill, and now we have to clean the cow and we have to, or the animal, or we have to butcher it, we have to get it back, and now we have to cook it, and now you're touching it, and you just are so intimately involved with all these processes that by the time you eat, imagine how much digestion has already started before that food even touches saliva in your mouth and is registered that's in your mouth. So we are completely, it's like the light spectrum. We only see this much of this light spectrum. And so we think this is the digestion, but the digestion process and being in homeostasis and being in proper circadian rhythms and fasting and feasting schedules comes from a completely different cycle that we're ejected from. And that's where we find spirituality, is being involved in every part of the food process, from the hunt, from the second you decide to go on the hunt and you're watching the weather and you're tracking and you're smelling, you know what I mean? And you haven't eaten for a couple of days. So you're super in tune to every smell and every adjustment, every change in the weather, every change in pressure, you know what I mean? Which is related to where the grass is going to grow and the moisture, and all the way until you finally swallow that food,
Right.
right? And then start eating it. It's like that book. It knows every single step of when you're going to be fed and when you're not going to be fed and how you're going to be fed and what you're going to be fed by. It's very slow. It's very intricate. And so um, I think by us being ejected from that and being removed so much from that, even just with eating with a fork, you're touching a piece of metal. You're not touching that food. You're separating yourself. When you go in the grocery store and you buy this processed garbage in a processed bag and a processed artificial environment with artificial lights and like, I'm hungry, so I'm just going to go down the grocery store. It doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
You're so far removed from your every aspect of your being. I hate that. And so I think that we lose ourselves so much we lose our morals, we lose our connection with nature, we lose our connection with spirituality, we lose more than what we realize from this separation, division, and divergence from our natural lifestyle. I think the more and closer we get together, the more spiritual, the more connected, the more in love with the food process that we become. And I think we are designed to be that way. And so, which is why I think it's important that for me and my family, we start raising food from the ground up. So that way we are involved in the food process and we are supplying ourselves because I I don't think that I can sustain my family, hunting and gathering. But am I making sense?
Absolutely. And in fact, I want
Okay.
to talk more about spirituality and the diet of early man. But if I can ask you first, because one of the goals is to kind of change the mindset of not only the people on the standard American diet, but also even plant-based eaters, or let's use the term vegans. So let me ask you, do you have pets? Are you an animal guy?
I am. I have a dog and without my permission, my daughter's got a little kitten
No.
and that kitten slept in my arms last night, so I'm warming up to him. But yeah.
So you're an animal lover.
Oh yeah.
And you talked about possibly wanting to raise a cow or lamb. So
Hmm.
justify that for me. Like, how do you raise that animal and look at those pretty eyes, especially cows and sheep? They have those giant eyes, or elk. How do you raise these animals and justify culling that animal for a meal?
Multiple reasons. Animals have different jobs when it comes to human survival. That's just the way it is. Some animals work for us. Some animals domesticate for relationships. Other animals, what I mean, pollinate the fruit that we eat. It's just, um, like, for example, the amount of bees that are forced to work pretty much against the will, even though it's their nature, in order to provide these almonds and these avocados, and then billions of them die. You know what I mean? We all are manipulating nature around us in order to help us survive, even building a house with trees by cutting down trees in order, I mean, to live, to prolong our life. And though every single thing out here has to live and obtain energy. And so as we obtain energy, we recycle that energy in ourselves to propagate us. And I know, in my opinion, there's nothing more important than my family, and my family's survival depends on me. So it's like me and my family have to be taken care of. And what's very interesting is one cow can feed my family for months. But in order to feed my family off avocados and salad and things like that, we're talking about millions of birds and bees and other animals and other plants who happen to be growing in those areas. So we want to talk about total loss of life. I believe my diet is the absolute minimal cost of life in order to propagate me and my family. Um, so one, that just that in a sense is the most vegan thing that you could do, in my opinion. Now, things that are raised to be eaten. And by the way, plants do not want to be eaten. They specifically have defense chemicals in them because they do not want to be eaten. They want to propagate their life. And so to be growing in artificial environments with chemicals sprayed on them nonstop, they do not like that. We have measured stress and crying and screaming, kind of, in a sense, the way they put it, in plants. So I remember I was talking to a Hindu once, and he goes, "Cows are so peaceful because they just eat the grass." And I said, "It doesn't sound very peaceful for the grass." Um, it's that I am made up of a bunch of little single-celled organisms, and so are plants. And that is life lost, right? It's a lot of life lost. We're talking about calories, right? The calories, we say calories to remove us from the fact that we are breaking down single-celled organisms into amino acids that we could convert to work for our amino acids. Plants do this as well, right? Which I mean, it can get convoluted, but a lot of plants don't always just get all their nutrients from sunlight. They get it from a lot of other things, and sometimes animal fats. And there's this tree that was measured that bears would go in, they would eat these salmon underneath these trees, and then they would leave the salmon carcasses there. And then these trees would get like a lot of the nutrition from the salmon. So we have Venus flytraps. So anyway, to say that these plants don't feel anything or they're not trying to survive is atrocious, and we're actually making their lives a lot harder and a lot worse, and it's actually damaging the environment even more so. Now, let's get on to the lives of these animals. If you live in a factory, I think that's not okay, which is why I think we need more people out there becoming farmers and becoming ranchers. Because I don't know if anybody's watched a freaking nature show or even been like, for example, I've been like on a survival trip for like 2 weeks where I did nothing but survive. Being out in the elements sucks.
Mhm.
Looking for your food sucks. You know what I mean? Everything about that sucks. It's a hard life. I like it, but like it sucks. It's not easy. And then all of a sudden, if you get injured and there's a predator after you, that's a horrible feeling. And then everybody in the herd leaves you because they don't want to get eaten by that predator. And then you're eaten alive and very painfully. That is the life cycle for all animals. You know, like 70% or something. I can't remember the number, but the majority of animals are comes from predators, right? They are predators. Predation is the main source of calorie consumption in the world, in the animal kingdom. That's just the way it is, which means that the majority of animals are being eaten. Like that's how it works. You get eaten. There's like no like zebra that raises its own family and then all of a sudden dies in old age in an Afghan with its family around it. No, they get picked off by disease, by the elements, by starvation, and by being eaten, right? So like that's their life,
Right.
right? So if I, right, to propagate my life, take one of those animals from the wild, from that environment of being eaten alive and being taken away from its family and the disease and the elements, I can put them on a beautiful farm. I can raise them into a decent age, make sure that they are loved, right? Make sure they are well fed, make sure that they have these great lives, make sure that they're protected. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so give them an optimum life, and then they have a painless death, and then their life goes on and propagates a family's life for months. So I think that is one of the most beautiful circles of life. And here's the other thing is I'm not my in my will right now, it's my goal to have the same thing happen to me. Like I just want to be left out in the woods and have nature take me back, feed a family of wolves, feed a family of maggots, you know what I mean? Go
Right.
back into the soil and have the plants use my nutrients to live. And my energy will hopefully propagate a ton of other animals for a good chunk of time. So that's the energy is not lost. Only if you start cremating yourself or putting yourself in like a concrete coffin, like an asshole, right? Like you use all this energy and then you just burn yourself and you're like, nobody else can use my energy. But like if you were to follow the way of our ancestors, no energy is lost. Whatever you eat, they eventually eat you, and that nutrition goes back into the grass and is eaten by the cows. And it's a beautiful renewable cycle that if only we could emulate in technology and empower people would it would be a multi-trillion dollar business. So we already have it. It's already in nature. We've just become disconnected from it. So looking those eyes, I could increase their lifespan by giving them a domesticated life. I can increase their lifespan by giving them proper diet, giving them, I look after them, I give them love. And so now they could have lived a life out there as a wild animal, right? Or they can live a domesticated life where they're loved and they have a job, and their job is to get fat and eventually feed my family. My dog has a companionship, a job of companionship, and to help me work the farm and to protect me. You know, my all these animals, you know, the chickens, their job is to lay eggs and to feed our family. Like we have given everybody a job. Our job, you know, we have plenty of jobs, but our job has ended up being a lot like human jobs have ended up being very incredible in the animal kingdom. Some very bad things too, and we can get into that. But regardless, as we all follow the jobs to keep ourselves propagated and to keep ourselves to the highest standard of morality. So how can I do that? I can do that actually very easily because I know I'm doing the best thing for the planet. I'm doing the best thing for that cow. I'm doing the best thing for my family. I'm doing the best thing for me. I'm doing the best thing for my dog. I'm doing the best thing in terms of propagating human life.
Right on. And you said like with factory farming, that's such a cool process. But if we all were able to raise one cow for the year and they have this a more painless death, I think that's definitely clearly that's the way to go. That's the true cycle of life too. What you were, because we talk about the cycle of life. Oh, it's the cycle of life. We're not living a normal cycle of life. What you're talking about, going back to the ground at the end, and that's the true cycle of life. So that's very interesting. Let's talk about early man. We started to go there. In your research, what was the diet of early man?
So I've done a lot of research on this. I've become quite obsessed with it. If we go all the way back to our primate ancestors in the trees, and you can, by the way, still look this up with our distant relatives of like the chimps and gorillas and stuff. They, whenever given the opportunity, eat meat viciously. If they see a smaller monkey, they chase that monkey down like you've never seen before. And guess what they eat usually first when they catch another monkey? They
Or
eat the brain. The
the
brain.
brain. Okay, okay.
The brain has the most omega-3s, saturated fat. It's like a nutrient-packed punch. They love the brain. So even before we were bipedal, the human species, or our ancestors rather, have a ancestral lineology, right? Lineage uh, to eating brain back when we were monkeys. So we've always known that. So what's very interesting is as the grasslands came, the savanna came and the jungle land receded, and our ancestors couldn't retreat into the jungle because other established chimps and things, I mean, were there. We had to go find out food in other places. And what's very interesting is in the jungle, there is not a lot of big game walking around. It's a bunch of little stuff, a lot of fruits and things like that. You know what I mean? It's wasn't very an attractive carnivorous place for animals. So you don't find too many carnivorous animals residing solely in the jungle, right? It's down to very few predators. In relation, I know someone's going to listen to that, and it's argument of semantics at that point. But what I'm saying is, like, as our ancestors started to go out in the grasslands, what was very interesting is we ended up becoming scavengers. Um, and it was very beneficial for us because we had the know-how to break open bones and skulls, because we knew the brains were in. So we knew what to look for, and we had the means to do so. So as bigger predators would go and catch some big game, it was very easy for us to walk around afterwards and pick up the bones and the carcasses and the skulls, carry them. Our ability to carry massive amounts of product and elements back to a safe environment, use tools to break open that skull, to break open that bone marrow, to eat whatever fat was left on that carcass. And that was a huge energy packed meal. And a lot of people don't know this, but we are like fat burning machines in terms of like we are fat adapted creatures. We run and manipulate fat in our body better almost than any other creature. Most other creatures run off of fermentation, by fermenting, you know, fiber and stuff like that. But a lot of the predators, they're more like protein adapted. So, for example, we can poison ourselves with protein poisoning by eating too low of a ratio of fat to protein. We cannot do that is because we started eating, we came from being an omnivorous animal and more herbivore, where we're getting most of our nutrition from saturated fat, to getting a lot and most of our saturated fat from brains and bone marrow on the fatty part of animals. And then as we became better hunters, then we started going, for the viscera and we kept the brains and the bone marrow. And we see evidence of this. We see evidence of bones being broken open and skulls being broken open in these very specific organizations to show that, like, not only do we have evidence of our brain size and our isotopes, proving that we were hyper carnivoristic, but we also have these very interesting collections of bones and skulls to show that we were eating the bone marrow and the brains in very high quantities. And it makes sense to me why the omega-3 demand of our brain is so high and why we're so inflamed, because we have just like avoided good fats all over. In addition to that is especially early humans, our stomach acidity could be like down to a pH of 1, which is like on like 1.5, and then at the very worst, if somebody's like vegan or something, a 3. We're talking about on scale of lions and even vultures, to show that we were eating rotten meat, to show that we have a barrier between the bacteria, our like outside bacteria, and our gut lining. So stomach acid is so acidic uh, that it can kill most bacteria in rotten meat. We're designed to eat raw, rotten meat, right? That's who we are. We no longer have a cecum that's digesting a ton of fiber into to turn to saturated fat. We no longer, it's our appendix is no longer a functioning thing. We don't have 4 different stomachs. Our digestive system has shrank dramatically compared to other primates, and our stomach acidity has skyrocketed immensely. And so to say what was the diet of our early ancestors, I think that for the longest time it was scavenger, so it scavenged meat, and it was brains and bone marrow, and maybe some opportunistic like nuts and bugs, and fruits, maybe I don't even know, probably fruit if they were in season. And then it started to graduate to the point that we became the alpha predators, and we started using those bones as tools. And then we started learning different things like hunting, and we started learning different things like fishing, and we started learning different things like what's it called? Structure, to make certain structures for capturing nets.
Mhm.
We started building what's the word, like shelters and things like that. And so anywho, then I think it became after that, so we're talking about like the past few 100,000 years, then we probably moved to like eating the entire cow, like, or the entire mammoth, or whatever big game we caught. Like, we ate all that bone marrow, all the brain, all the viscera, all the fat, and we used every single piece of it. Did
Yeah.
that answer your question?
Yeah, you did actually. And then even up through like Native Americans, they were eating some vegetation, right? Like maize and
It depends, actually. It depends where you were. If they were kind of stuck, like some of them had some agriculture and planting and things like that. But the ones who were in power oftentimes were not. They were the ones who were the successful hunters. And so it was like the ones off to the side would kind of like, oh, well, we couldn't, we don't have rights basically to the buffalo or whatever big game. So they just started figuring out how to manipulate plants. And so, yeah, we have this like conception that they were always eating corn and stuff like that, but that was actually a more recent phenomenon in the human history. It looks like most of it was meat eaters, and buffalo was one of the biggest things about that. And it makes sense because buffalo is delicious, has a lot of fat, and they do very, very well on the North American plains. And when I say buffalo, I'm sorry, I mean bison. Buffalo is oftentimes misconstrued as a bison, but yeah.
is it different? Buffalo and
Yeah,
bison?
so yes, so a bison is North American, and a buffalo is actually originated in Africa and Europe, I want to say, or Asia. I can't.
Oh, interesting. Wow. I did not know that. Well, there's even a theory, one of the doctors mentioned that the Native Americans may not have even been eating that corn. They were selling it to us or like trading with
Mm,
us. They were like, let them have it kind of thing. And maybe
yeah,
using that corn to lure animals and
yeah,
hunt easier. So kind of they were doing like almost what we're doing today. We're growing corn and soy to feed the cows and yeah, and then selling it to the masses. So
yeah,
I thought that was an interesting theory. And touching on spirituality with the Native Americans, there was also a theory expressed to me that like the stories and the lore that we hear, spirits and the spirit of the buffalo, spirit of the eagle, that it's almost like early veganism, like when the children would cry because the animal had to be killed, they would make up this story to kind of make it more palatable that they were hunting these animals or killing this pig that they raised or whatever.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We see a lot of this lore, especially within the stars, but it's like there is a lot of people don't understand. They've kind of like mystified it, and not that I claim that I understand, but I've looked into this a lot, and from my gathering, it's like it's the lore of the buffalo, the spirit of the buffalo. It's very interesting because we realize that the buffalo and the bison, right, each bison is different. However, they all have certain trends and certain behaviors. And so it's like their overall spirit as they work together. You know what I mean? And that spirit of the buffalo doesn't die. It has certain manifestations that you can personify to help understand and educate your people or educate your kids what how to understand this buffalo, how to become more connected with it, right? And
Right.
so it's like rather than referring to all these bison in a group, you say like, the spirit of the bison is being um blessed by the rains, by the spirit of the clouds, and so rather than this complex cycle of science, it's a complex cycle of social interaction between these spirits of the buffalo. And they considered the buffalo and the rains and stuff to be intelligent because it was moving and it was alive, and things that were alive had to move. The stars moved. And so they made these connections in order to better teach their kids through lore, like how the buffalo move. And the way they describe the story is through the spirit of the buffalo and what his desires are and what his fears are. And so that way, when they are learning the buffalo, they understand, oh, they don't go north. You know what I mean? Because they fear this. Or you know what I mean? They go
Yeah.
south here. And so these stories ring a bell as you're hunting them, as you're trying to figure out where they are, as you're trying to figure out what they're about to do. And so you start becoming very ingrained with your genetics, with your spirit rather, with the spirit of the buffalo, because you are one in that social relationship of the personifications of these spirits. So um that to me is a very beautiful nuance that not a lot of people really connect with, right? Yeah, and I'll end it right there because I can keep going on about it, but I think that our connection with nature comes from the fact that we respect it so much, and we only respect it to the level that we do is because it feeds us.
Yeah.
Our energy, our spirit is fed by the spirit of the buffalo. And so that's very intimate. That's not just me eating food for nutrients. That is extremely more intimate than what people realize. And so therefore your respect for it and your treatment of it goes way up.
Yeah, yeah. I think science, a lot of the science isn't correct. And we tell everyone that it's fact, and then we find out 10 years later, oh no, that causes cancer. So now it changes, but we're so disconnected from nature now. And
Yeah.
and that's probably the root of many of our problems, our issues. Is there anything I'm not asking you that I should be asking you?
I think this was one of my favorite interviews,
Oh,
to be
thank you.
honest. And because you asked a lot of the questions of stuff that I research and ponder, which usually is a little bit more peripheral than what people generally want to know is how to lose weight and how to get better. But you're asking a lot of these things that a lot of us who have been in carnivore for a while are getting into, which is like circadian rhythm and grounding. And a lot of that does research into our ancestors and reconnecting with our food. So I think you're very enlightened to those concepts of carnivore and of way of eating. So it was very nice and liberating to be able to talk about that. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you so much. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I
Yeah.
was vegan for almost 40 years.
Oh, wow. How
Yeah,
did you survive?
almost 40 years. It's amazing. I actually did pretty good. I think because I am pretty knowledgeable about nutrition. I'm a holistic
Yeah.
nutritionist. So I I did what I had to do, meaning, eating copious amounts of beans and
Yeah.
really working very hard to get the nutrients I needed to survive. But in the end, post menopause, it
Mm,
suddenly came to backfire on me, and I
hmm.
gained a tremendous amount of weight very quickly. I'm still dealing with that. I'm very new to carnivore, and I'm just learning about it. So I think probably the reason why the interview felt right to you is because I am so inquisitive and I'm learning as you speak. So I'm just asking you the questions that I have.
Oh, yeah. You know what? That was really good. I thought you were leading me to these questions because you've like done this before, like a bunch, but like that felt really good. It felt really natural, and I really enjoyed it. So I hope you enjoyed it too. I really do.
Absolutely. I learned a lot from you.